as a matter of fact, a slowdown rather than an outright recession, and a soft landing, a gradual slowing of growth rather than a catastrophic fall, is the better scenario, both for us and for the working class. And it's possible in Britain that could be the case. But you'd have to say it's not the most likely scenario. It's more likely that it will be certainly as bad as 92 and probably worse than that. After all, if you look at what's taking place now, if you take housing, for example, housing prices in Britain at the moment are stagnating. Now, that is not as bad as what is happening in some other countries, or they've fallen very marginally in most areas. In Ireland, for example, there's already been a 7% fall in house prices. In Spain, house prices have fallen further. Now, that's partly in Britain because there is a lack of supply. There aren't enough houses, especially in the southeast. And that can have an effect on limiting the degree to which house prices fall. However, we would have to say that probably, and certainly to some degree, housing is going to follow what has already taken place in commercial property. I won't give all the statistics, they're in the documents. But last year, commercial property, and it was all in the last part of the year, fell by 9% on average. Some sectors like warehouses fell by more than a third. And it was as a result of that you had the crisis in the big investment funds having to shut their doors and say to investors, you can't take any more money out, because if you take any more money out, we might collapse, as people panicked as the price of commercial property fell. And probably then the same thing is going to take place in the housing market as well, and possibly to the same degree. But even if it isn't, then it will still have a devastating effect on the working class. Now, what's most important for us, and what I want to concentrate on, are what will be the political consequences, and the consequences in terms of effects on consciousness. Without doubt, one feature will be, as has been described internationally, an increasing layer of workers and young people who draw the conclusion, first of all, that capitalism doesn't work, that this system can't meet their needs, and begin to search for an alternative and move in the direction of socialist ideas. However, that will not necessarily be the only, it certainly won't be the only, and it will not necessarily even be the main trend in the first period. There will be other elements as well. For example, given the alienation that already exists amongst youth in the inner cities, then the idea of riots on quite a big scale, bigger than we've seen since the mid-1980s, amongst the disaffected youth of the inner cities, mass unemployment and so on, is something that could be posed. And I'd add an extra point to that, because although the riots of the inner cities in the mid-80s were described by the tabloid press as race riots, in fact they weren't in general. They were riots of black and white young people in the inner cities, against low pay and against the police and the role of the police at that stage. But now, given the increased fragmentation between different communities, the lower class consciousness that exists, then there could be, and we saw a little precursor of it in Handsworth, there could unfortunately be an element of race riots, not just between black and white, but between different communities in riots that could take place in the future. We also have to say, particularly if there is not yet the development of a mass party of the working class, that far-right racist parties like the British National Party could make breakthroughs as a result of the economic developments that are going to take place. Given already the fears that exist on the question of immigration, despite the stupidities of the BNP, despite the splits that exist in them, nonetheless, the potential for them to grow will exist. Now, having said that, we have to counter that, and one of the things that's very encouraging in the recent period is the growth in the number of young people who recognise the danger of the BNP and want to become involved in campaigns against parties such as them, and we have to build on that. But the most important trend for us is the trend of radicalisation and politicisation of a layer of young people and of the working class. And that trend will be strengthened by developments in the capitalist class. I don't want to spend too long on Northern Rock because it got covered in this morning's session, but it really is significant. Britain has one of the most neoliberal ruling classes in the world, and that's going some. I mean, it's not like the rest of them are against neoliberalism. And yet, you have the majority of the capitalist class in this country campaigning for the nationalisation of Northern Rock. Of course they don't mean genuine nationalisation. When Financial Times Times editorials are calling for nationalisation, you know they don't want it in workers' interests. That's absolutely clear. But nonetheless, it will have a certain effect. I went and debated, actually, last weekend at Oxford University with Peter Tatchell, who's on the left of the Green Party, and he would describe himself as a socialist in the Green Party. And in his introduction, he said, the left are just against things, you never put anything positive forward. And so when I spoke after him, I made points about the only real way to prevent the destruction of the environment is for nationalisation of socialist planned economy. When he replied, he said, nationalisation is completely outmoded, it's the past, it's gone. We have to use different language today, and he doesn't just mean language, he means content as well, by the way. Now, perhaps amongst some of the students in that audience, what he said went down. But in fact, he's got the timing completely wrong, because the idea of nationalisation is, of course, coming back onto the agenda. And by the way, it's not insignificant that the legislation to nationalise Northern Rock has also left the government room to nationalise other banks because they fear future crises that they may have to bail out. As I say, of course, it's not genuine nationalisation. They intend to sell it back to the private sector at a profit at a later stage. And of course, they've not even nationalised all of it, because Granite, which seems to be all the profitable bits, is off in Jersey in some kind of offshore fund. But nonetheless, it raises the idea of nationalisation as a viable alternative. Now, we raised this point in the Perspectives document, but for those who are here from the West Midlands, I was in Birmingham during the period of time when the Longbridge plant, a massive car plant, was shut down. Comrades who've been around a few years will remember the huge demonstration, a kind of outpouring of the Birmingham working class against the threatened closure of Longbridge and the absolutely despicable role played by the trade union leaders at that time in preventing struggle. Later, when it came to be shut, when we went down and intervened and raised the idea of nationalisation and raised occupying the plant as the only way that nationalisation could be won, workers were really sympathetic. They thought we were lovely people and well done for trying, but there wasn't a cat's chance in hell of them deciding to occupy. And a major factor in that is because nationalisation seemed like a pipe dream. Who was ever going to nationalise anything ever again? Today, in a similar situation, particularly against the background of increased unemployment, which will mean even the Muck jobs and the Tesco jobs that Longbridge workers have gone into will not necessarily be available, then I think the possibility of occupation could be raised again, exactly because workers think when you nationalise Northern Rock, why the hell shouldn't you do the same? Should do the same thing for us? And so it has. Now, Brown's horror of nationalisation seems irrational, but there is a point to it because it has, as Seamus Mill put it in the Guardian, begun to break the taboo of nationalisation and raise the idea of it again, which then allows us to raise genuine nationalisation on the basis of workers' control and management and so on. And it won't be an end. It's not an end here. It's not the only measure that will be carried out. Because as was described in the last session, the capitalist classes of the world, they don't change policy on the basis of rational discussion and thought. I mean, they do discuss and think, obviously, but they're forced to change policy when they butt their heads up against the problems of their own system. If you look back to the crises of the 70s, then the ideas of Keynesianism were abandoned and what became neoliberalism adopted because they had no choice. They had to try and do something to stop the crisis in their system, and in the same way, they've been pushed empirically now away from neoliberalism. There will be greater moves towards protectionism, towards state intervention and so on, and that in turn raises the possibility of the development of Keynesian ideas, but also of us raising the ideas of genuine socialism. Now, I think one of the other features of discussion in this meeting today is going to be, will a recession lead to mass struggles of the working class, not in Latin America, but here in Britain? The short answer is yes, but we're not simplistic economic determinists, and exactly when and how is a more complicated question. And it is possible, particularly if it's from quite a low basis of struggle, which we still have a relatively low basis of struggle at the moment, and particularly if the recession is very sharp and deep, that there will be what got called this morning a kind of stunning effect on the working class, where workers are so desperate to feed their families, to keep their houses, that the idea of struggle seems temporarily not possible because they're consumed by the struggle to survive.